Have you ever been in a really big, bad hailstorm? Hi kids, this is Auntie Myla, and this is a story about a big hailstorm. Our verse is Psalm 130, verse 4. It says, "You offer forgiveness that we might learn to fear and love you." God offers forgiveness. When we do something naughty, Jesus says, "I'll forgive you." But we have to ask him, and he'll forgive us. That is so awesome. Well, April lived in a state that had lots of hailstorms. It was a hot summer day, and she was going out to check on the cattle. She went for a long walk. She walked, and it was hot, and so hot. And she was walking along, hiking along. She walked for a long ways. And then all of a sudden, it started clouding over. And she thought, oh dear, I better turn around and go home. So she turned around and started walking home. But you know what? The hail started coming down, started beating down. And she thought, oh dear. And she started to run, and it was hailing, and then lightning was flashing, thunder and lightning. And she was running and running. She thought, oh dear. And she was running, and the hail was just hitting her. You know, hail can be small or it can be big. This was big hail. It was just hitting her. She said, oh no. And she was running. And then there was a big tree there. And she ran under the tree. And just then, the lightning flashed. The lightning flashed and hit the tree, and the tree split right in front of her. And she felt tingling all over. And she fell down. And then next thing she knew, she thought, I better get up. But she couldn't get up. The tree, part of it had fallen on her, and the branches were hurting her. And the hail was hailing on her, and she lay there. She thought, I am in so much trouble. I don't know what to do. But you know what? There was something bigger going on in her mind than the hail. She lay there, and the hail was hitting her, and the thunder was going. She thought, oh dear. What if I die? And she says, and last night I was at church at the meeting, and the minister said, does anyone want to accept Jesus? And she says, I didn't put up my hand because I don't know about accepting Jesus. I love him and I want it, but what if he asks me to do something I don't want to do? And she said, I didn't accept Jesus, and now I'm lying here, and the hail is hailing, and there was flash of lightning, and I might die. She said, oh dear, I'm in trouble. And she thought, I've got to get out of here. And so she wiggled, because remember, a big branch had crashed on top of her, and she was wiggling, pulling, and she finally got out, but she felt like she had just been beat all over, and it was still hailing, great big balls of hail. It's like balls of ice, and it was still hailing, and she says, I've got to go, I've got to get home, and she was walking along. She says, that was close, and she started talking to Jesus. And she says, Jesus, I think I almost died. And I don't want to die without accepting you. Jesus, I want to accept you into my life in case I die. And even if I don't die, I want you in my life because I really do love you. And she was walking along. The hail was beating down. And she thought, you know, there's an old house over there. And the house is gone, but there's a cellar way down underneath the house. Maybe I could run down in that cellar and hide until the storm passes over. So she ran over there, and she was just going down into that cellar, and she heard something. And she thought, what? That's a car. She came back out of the cellar, and she was waving. She said, that's my dad. And she was waving. But Daddy drove right past. Daddy didn't see her. And it was so noisy, he didn't hear her. And she thought, oh, that was Daddy. And she thought, what should I do now? She said, well, maybe I'll just walk on home. And so she kept walking on the road, walking, and it was hailing, ow! And she was walking on, ow! She was in a terrible problem. She was walking along. And then she thought, oh, I think I'm getting closer to home. I recognize that tree over there. And she was walking along. And all of a sudden, she heard something behind her. And she looked, and there was Daddy. He had been driving around and around looking for her. They knew she was out there someplace. And she ran over and she got in the passenger seat and got in. He said, how are you? She said, well, I'm kind of hurt. But she says, Daddy, I worry about your wheat crop. Because Daddy had planted the wheat and it was coming up. And the hail had just beat it down. And the crop where he grew for his cattle. And he says, it looks pretty messy. It looks pretty bad. He says, but I was more worried about you, April. I was more worried about you. And I'm so glad. I feel so relieved that I found you because I had been driving back and forth and I couldn't find you. She says, yeah, you drove past me once and I was waiting, but you didn't see me. He said, I did. And they're driving along and Daddy said, well, what really worried me the most is that you hadn't accepted Jesus. And I didn't want you to die because you hadn't accepted Jesus. And she sat there. She says, Daddy, I did. I accepted Jesus just a few minutes ago. And Daddy said, oh, that's wonderful, April. And they drove back. And as they were driving up, she saw the chickens walking around the yard. They were pecking at the white hail. I guess they like ice, huh? And they were pecking at it. She got out and she walked in and Mom said, oh, April, I'm so glad you're here. We were so worried about you. We knew you were out in the storm, unprotected. You didn't have an umbrella or anything. We were so worried about you. I'm so glad you're home. And she helped April in and take off her wet sweater and wet clothes and got a nice hot bath. And Mom gave her a nice hot supper. And while she was eating, Dad said, Mom, April accepted Jesus into her life. And Mom said, aw, April, I'm so glad you did. Yes, that's the story of April and the terrible hailstorm. Have you accepted Jesus into your life? I hope you have, because that's the best thing you could do. I want to pray. Dearest Jesus, thank you so much for saving April from that terrible storm. Thank you that she accepted you. And Lord, I accept you, and the children want to accept you too, for Jesus' sake. Amen. Thank you so much for coming by, and I have more stories for you. So be sure and tune in again, okay?